Most people don't realize how easily they can get pulled into relationships that drain them emotionally until it's too late. Hi, I'm Dimitris. I'm a trauma-informed coach with a background in psychology. And as someone who has worked with many clients recovering from narcissistic dynamics, I've seen the same red flags appear again and again. In this video, I'll walk you through 8 simple questions that can help you spot a narcissist before it costs you your peace. Plus one bonus question you can ask when you start dating someone to know what they're about. That I will leave for the end. See, when we talk about healthy relationships, the type of relationships we actually want to have, there are a few foundations that need to be in place. And if you're a grounded person, then you will agree with those 3 foundational qualities: openness, curiosity, and emotional responsibility. You see, in healthy relationships, you want to feel like there's a sense of partnership. Not perfection, you're not aiming for that. You want mutuality. You show up as you are. The other person does the same, and over time there's this ongoing dance of learning, of adjusting, of learning how to repair and how to grow together. As a therapist, I often tell clients that good relationships do not demand performance. They invite presence. But then what happens is that someone walks in and disrupts the balance entirely. Not with outright abuse, not at least at first, and not with some visible toxicity at first. But it happens slowly, it happens subtly. It happens when you feel that the air shifts. And what once was mutual becomes one-sided. That's exactly how it feels to be in a relationship with a narcissist. Before we go into those 8+1 questions, let's talk about the definition of what is narcissism and who is a narcissist. Because many times, especially lately, I feel that people misuse the term, especially when they don't get what they want, so they throw the term and criticize people just because they didn't get what they want. Now, I'm not going to go into the full detail, into the full clinical background of what makes up a narcissistic personality, but I want us to define the basics. So think of narcissism as a personality trait characterized by this inflated sense of self-importance, a need for admiration, and a tendency to exploit others. And this can manifest in 2 ways. The first is grandiose narcissism with this high self-esteem and dominance. And then we have the vulnerable narcissism, which is with this fragile self-esteem and hostility. We know that narcissism can stem from developmental trauma, where a person's emotional development was disrupted, which led to this inability to self-reflect and to regulate their emotions. And with this definition in mind, I want to give you a very specific framework, those 9 questions that a narcissist cannot really answer honestly. And not because they are unwilling to answer in that moment that you ask them, but because the traits one has to have to answer those questions, they just aren't wired into how narcissists relate to others. I know that some of you will hear these questions and you will realize that, oh man, this is exactly what I've lived through. And others, you might be in the early stages of a relationship. And I want you to have this language that helps you see things clearly before they escalate. So let's jump into it. Question 1. What wounds are you still carrying with you? One of the clearest ways to sense if someone is emotionally safe is to ask them these simple questions. What are some of your deepest wounds? This is the kind of question that invites intimacy, not because you're digging for drama, but because in any meaningful relationship, you want to know if the other person has looked deep inward. Now, when you ask that to someone grounded, someone real, someone who has done or who is willing to do the inner work, they might pause and they might reflect. And you know what? It's not going to be comfortable for them. Because to be honest, no one wants to be pouring out their hearts 100% at the beginning of the relationship especially, and they shouldn't do that. But when you ask that question to a narcissist, you usually get a blank stare or a joke, or they try to deflect the question. They might say something like, people have let me down, but I don't really care. Or they might say that, yeah, I've been through many things, but I don't let them affect me. But here's the thing, that statement sounds strong, but it's not. It's avoidance dressed as resilience. In the therapy room, I see this pattern often, especially in people who grew up having to put their guards up really early in life. Narcissists learn, consciously or not, that vulnerability is unsafe, that if they admit weakness, they lose control. So they rewire their own story. They cut off their emotional memory and pretend that this traumatic thing never touched them. But what they miss is this, that when you cannot own your own wounds, you unconsciously project them onto other people. So they become cold, they become critical, they become dismissive. And when you try to connect with them, they punish you for asking the very question that could bring you closer. And that's not strength, that's fear hiding in grandiosity. And here's the part that most people miss, and this is where everything shifts. Narcissists don't just avoid hard questions, they punish you for even asking them. Because every question you raise is a threat to the story they're trying to protect. And the moment you start asking the right questions, you stop playing by their rules and start protecting your own truth. So let's go deeper. This next question might be the one that gives you clarity. Question 2. Why is it so hard for you to admit your mistakes? Here's another question that can reveal more than you would expect. Why is it so difficult for you to admit that you were wrong? In a healthy relationship, making a mistake is not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means that you're human. But for someone with narcissistic traits, admitting a mistake feels like ego death. It's not just that I was wrong. It becomes something more like, if I was wrong, then I'm weak. And if I'm weak, then I'm unlovable. So they try to protect themselves with this wall of defensiveness. They deflect, they blame, they rewrite the sequence of events so that nothing can stick to them. And when the mistake is undeniable, they will often flip the narrative. They might say something, yeah, okay, this happened as you say it, but it only happened because you pushed me. And this is where so many people in relationships with narcissists, they start to doubt themselves, because if you're always the one apologizing, the one trying to repair, always the one, walking on thin ice, you might start thinking that you are the problem. But the inability to take responsibility, that's not your burden to fix. In my work, I often say to my clients that accountability is one of the core ingredients of safety. And if someone cannot say, I messed up, then they cannot build intimacy. They can build an image, they can build control, but they cannot build trust. Question number 3. Why do you always need to impress strangers? Have you ever noticed how some people light up in front of strangers, but then they dim around the people closest to them? And here's the question. Why do you need to impress people you don't even know? For the narcissist, the answer is simple, but it's very revealing. Strangers are a clean slate. They haven't seen behind the mask. They don't know what's happening behind the curtain. They don't know the real cracks. So the narcissist thinks, here's my chance to rewrite my story, to play the hero, to be admired. They perform, they exaggerate, and they curate every single thing. And if you're in their life, you've probably seen this transformation happen in real time and really fast. Someone from cold and cruel with you being warm and charming in front of others. It can be really shocking to watch, but here's why it happens. Because admiration from strangers feels safer than intimacy with those who truly know you. Because intimacy requires honesty, and honesty requires vulnerability. It requires depth. But this superficial admiration, this is surface level. And the narcissist prefers the surface they can control rather than think that they lose control in the depths. So in my sessions, I often see clients confused by this behavior of their partner. They say, for example, they're so nice to others, why can't they not be the same with me? And the answer is simple, because you have seen behind the curtain. That's why they chase approval from the unfamiliar, because it keeps their image safe. But real connection doesn't live in this performance. It lives in being seen. Question 4. Why do my differences threaten you? Let's talk about something subtle here, but which is incredibly revealing. Why do my differences feel threatening to you? See, in healthy relationships, differences are expected. They're even welcomed. You might like jazz, I like 80s rock. You recharge in silence, I need conversation. That's what makes intimacy rich. But with a narcissist, your differences are not just differences, they are disruptions. See, when you show up with a different opinion or a different emotional reaction to something, or even a need that doesn't match theirs, they do not get curious about where this thing comes from. They get defensive because in their world, your difference equals their loss of control. And without empathy, which is essentially the ability to imagine someone else's inner world and attune to that, without that, they cannot hold your experience without making it about themselves. So when you show up with something different than they think or feel, instead of them getting too curious about it and say, tell me more, they will say, why are you doing this to me? And that's the root of it all. A narcissist experiences your autonomy as a threat to their dominance. They are not interested in mutual understanding. They are interested in maintaining their control and in maintaining the spotlight on them. So if your thoughts or needs divert attention away from them, they will react, they will diminish, they will dismiss, or even attack them. Not because you did something wrong, but because your uniqueness reminds them that they're not the axis of your world. And for someone who builds identity around control, this is something not to be tolerated. Question number 5. Do you believe your opinion cancels out everyone else's? Here's a question that is less about conflict and more about power. Do you actually believe your opinion invalidates everyone else's? We all have preferences, we all have different perspectives, we all have our own biases, and in healthy relationships, this is part of the dance. You say what you think, I say what I think, and somewhere in the middle we meet, or at least we understand each other better. But a narcissist, they do not dance with this dance, they are dictating. They often assume that their view is not one version of the truth. It is a truth. Whether it's politics, whether it's parenting, or whether it's how you load the dishwasher. Their default setting is, I know best, I see clearly. Others are confused and they know nothing. And if you try to challenge that, if you try to challenge their view, they will not explore why you're doing it. They will crush you. Because disagreement, to them, it feels like disloyalty. And since they build self-worth around being right, they can never tolerate the idea that someone else might offer a valid alternative. And this is why conversations with narcissists, they feel like you're going in circles. They feel very exhausting because you're not engaging in a dialogue. You're just defending and debating. And over time, you start to feel that your own voice has no room to land. But real connection doesn't come from one person winning the argument. It comes from both people being willing to listen, not just to respond, but to understand. And that's a form of mutuality, that's a form of reciprocity that a narcissist rarely knows how to give. Question 6. In what ways do you think you need to grow? Here's a deceptively simple question that tells you everything you need to know about someone else's self-awareness. In what ways do you think you still need to grow? Most people, if they're honest, they can name at least, a couple of things. Like, for example, I'm learning how to be more patient, or I'm learning how to let go and how to be more emotionally available, or I'm working on my stress, or things like that. But when you ask a narcissist this question, you will likely get two things. Either you'll get a deflection, or you'll get an answer that sounds like truth, it sounds like growth, but it isn't. For example, something like, well, I guess I could be better at hiding how much I care. Or maybe I need to stop expecting excellence from others who do not match my standards. In other words, I'm so damn good that this is my only fault. You see, for a narcissist, admitting the need for growth feels like weakness. But it's more than that. It kind of threatens their entire self-image they have spent years building. Growth implies imperfection. It implies that you're not finished. And this is something terrifying for someone whose entire identity rests on them being impressive and them being untouchable. But here's the truth. Real growth only happens when you are willing to confront your edges, not to perform humility, but to practice it. If someone cannot name how they are evolving, it's usually because they're not. And if they don't see room for change in them, they will never create space for your evolution either. Question 7. If I frustrate you so much, why do you keep coming back? Now, here's a question that haunts many people stuck in toxic dynamics. If I frustrate you so much, why do you keep returning? And it's a fair question. You'd think that someone who criticizes you, who complains, or who pulls away all the time wouldn't want to be with you, wouldn't want to stick around. But a narcissist often does stick around because they're not doing it to connect, they're doing it to dominate. You see, the push and pull dynamic, this constant tension, isn't a bug in the system. This is the system. So when they return to the relationship, they're not doing it because they value this mutual support. They're doing it because it gives them a platform to feel superior. It gives them a platform to reset control, and it makes them stay relevant in your emotional landscape. So every time you get upset and you try to explain yourself, every time you get upset and you try to explain yourself, or every time you ask for clarity or closure, or every time you plead for change, you're feeding the illusion that they matter more than they actually do. And in their mind, your emotional energy, yes, even this frustration that comes out of you, they take it as a kind of proof that you still care, that they still have power over you. So that's why they come back, but not to repair. They come back to reinforce their dominance. And that's why some of the most draining relationships are not the ones filled with constant shouting and friction. They're the ones where every attempt to connect becomes fuel for more manipulation. Because for a narcissist, your emotional response, even your pain, is a supply source. Question number 8. Why do you go silent? Not a peaceful silence that builds intimacy, but the kind of silence that leaves you questioning your own worth. So here's the final question. Why do you go silent? Why do you disappear, for example? It might happen after an argument. It might happen after you express a need, or paradoxically, after a moment of vulnerability. And suddenly they vanish. No explanation, no closure, just distance. See, for a narcissist, the silent treatment is a strategy. It's not avoidance. It's control. When they shut down or pull away, they're not trying to calm the situation. They're trying to dominate it again and again, because silence is power. It forces you to fill the gap, to chase, to over-apologize, to second-guess yourself. It's this form of passive-aggressive punishment. And let's be clear here. There are some healthy people who use silence to reflect. They take their time to deal with their own emotions and come back to you to repair the relationship and tell you, you know what, this is what happened, that's how I see it, let's work on it. But narcissists use it to manipulate. They withhold presence as a way of teaching you a lesson. So for example, it's something like, you upset me, then you don't get access to me. But intimacy doesn't grow in emotional exile. It grows through dialogue. It grows through mutual respect and emotional safety. And if someone repeatedly uses silence to assert control, this is not strength, this is fear wearing a mask of superiority. And now it's time for the bonus question. What did you learn about yourself from your last relationship? Now, here's a question that tells you everything you need to know about someone's emotional maturity, and it's one that narcissists often cannot answer in any meaningful way. And you definitely won't ask this question at the very beginning of the relationship, at the very first couple of dates. But let's be real, most people have some discomfort when it comes to reflecting on past relationships. It's vulnerable. But someone who's genuinely doing the work will still be able to tell you that, you know what, they learned X, Y, Z. Not just that their ex did everything wrong, not just how they were mistreated, but how their relationship changed them, what patterns they noticed about themselves, what they might do differently next time. But a narcissist won't tell you that. If you ask them this question, what they will do is that they will blame the other person. It will be something like, she was too emotional, or he didn't understand me, or he was just insecure. It's all about the other person, and rarely, if ever, do they look inward. Because here's the thing, in order to answer this question honestly, you need to be able to hold two truths at the same time. First, you have to be willing to see the ways that you were hurt and the ways that you might have hurt someone else. You need enough humility to admit that you were not perfect, and enough curiosity to ask yourself why. Why did you act the way you did? And this is what we call in psychology reflective functioning, which is your ability to observe your own thoughts, your own feelings, and your own behaviors with different perspectives. And it's a trait that is essential for building a healthy relationship. Narcissists typically struggle with this question because they have built an entire identity around being right, around being strong, around never showing weakness. So admitting that they have anything to learn from a breakup, that feels like a threat to their whole self-image. And the irony is that the very inability to reflect on the past is exactly what keeps them repeating it. Let me give you an example. When you go and you ask a narcissist this question, what did you learn from your last relationship? You'll probably hear something like, I learned never to trust others, or something like that. But that's not learning, this is defense. Or they might say, I learned that I should have left earlier. And again, that's not insight, that's avoidance dressed up as empowerment. Now, compare that with someone who says, like, something, for example, I realize that I tend to shut down when I feel criticized, or I need to work on communicating instead of withdrawing. Now, this is emotional maturity. This is someone who can grow. So when it comes to this bonus question, it's not about the answer you'll get. It's about how they will answer. Do they pause? Do they reflect? Do they see their own part in the story? And if they cannot do that, you might be talking to someone who's emotionally stuck. And here's the final point I want to make on this. Someone's ability to reflect on their past is a direct prediction of how they will behave in your future. Because if they have never unpacked their last relationship, chances are they will bring all that baggage into this one, and they won't even see it. So ask the question and really listen, because you're not just listening for what happened, you're listening for who they became because of it. Now, what do we take from all of this? These are 9 questions that are not tricks, they are invitations, ones that require emotional honesty, they require empathy, they require emotional maturity. But when you ask them and all you get is defensiveness, is silence, or is blame, then this tells you everything you need to know. Narcissists aren't incapable of answering because they don't understand the question. They are incapable because the answers would crack the mask they have spent years wearing. And here's the good news. You don't have to match their avoidance with your own. You get to be open, you get to be curious, you get to be accountable, you get to say, I'm still growing, I make mistakes, and I choose connection over control. And in doing that, you filter out the people who cannot meet you where you are. So if any part of today's message landed with you, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life can answer these questions with honesty? And more importantly, can you? Because real intimacy starts with mutual transparency, not with perfection, not with performance. Just 2 people willing to show up with their flaws and everything. So choose depth over display and never settle for connection without truth. And always ask yourself, what is that thing within me that makes me do the things I do? Subscribe to my channel, give a like to this video, and go to designthyself.com to join my newsletter. I share every week tools and insights to help you design a better life. And if you want to work together, I'll leave my details below. Till next time, I wish you well, and always keep asking the right questions.